Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our first virtual CPD Summer School. We're thrilled to have you here this morning, this very glorious morning. My name's Charlotte Stevenson, and I'm a Business Development Manager in the university. Two quick pieces of housekeeping before we get going. We've got the chat function available if you want to talk to any of the team. There's a few of us here who can answer any questions if you've got sound problems. And we've also got the Q&A section here. If you've got any questions you'd like to pose to Elizabeth about the Pharmabees project or the presentation, type them into the Q&A and we'll get to them at the end. We're all working from home, so please bear with us if there's any technical problems, comedy talking on mute, interruptions from children, animals, delivery people. That's enough from me. I'll hand over to Elizabeth Roche, who's the Pharmabees manager for the Civil Mission Project. Enjoy.
Sorry, I was muted. My name is Elizabeth Roche, and I work for Cardiff University in the School of Pharmacy, and I manage the outreach and engagement for the Pharmabees program. So we have a really cool team. We are made up of quite a few people. We're quite a large team, and not all the people listed on here are part of the team. We have a lot of different research projects going on as well. But the head of research is Professor Les Bailey, and then I run the Civic Mission Project, which is outreach and engagement in Morris. He runs the Triosi Cymru project, which is for high school students, so I work mainly with primary students. And then we have 50,000 bees on the roof of our building in a hive, which is really fun. So I get to be one of the beekeepers that looks after the bees. And we're hoping that we can create a bee-friendly city in Cardiff, supporting the education of children of all ages and contributing to the fight against antibiotic resistance of superbugs. So a little bit about me. I'm from Ohio. You can probably tell from my accent that I'm not from Wales originally. And I got a master's degree in plant pathology at The Ohio State University, which is the disease of plants. So I really do like plants and horticulture. I worked for Ohio State Extension in the past, the National Arboretum in Washington, D.C., CIMMYT in Mexico City, and the USDA. And I've done lots of different agricultural research in the past. But this is my first time working with bees, which is exciting. And I moved to the UK after I met my British husband. And I'm part of the Pharmabees team, and I manage the outreach and engagement for Pharmabees. So we do different events throughout the community and in schools around Cardiff and South Wales. So I'm going to show you guys a little bit video, which kind of summarizes the project and explains a little bit more about the research that we do. So bear with me 1 second. And if this, for some reason, doesn't work, I did share the link with you in the chat, I believe.
Creating a bee-friendly city. If I had to describe, so imagine if Welsh honey was a superfood. Professors and researchers at Cardiff University were looking into new antibiotics, the types of medicine that could tackle even the nastiest of superbugs you might find in hospitals, like MRSA. One of their lines of research was on the antibacterial properties of honey, which led them to discover a small back garden in Tywyn, North Wales. A man named Chris had been producing honey for fun in his back garden, and by pleasant coincidence, the honey his bees were producing was an antibacterial super honey. The researchers based in Cardiff were very excited by this discovery, and putting on their thinking hats, wondered what gave this particular honey its super properties. Like humans, plants that bees feed off have individual DNA sequences, allowing scientists to identify the type of plant from the tiniest sample. Similar to a Jurassic Park movie, the scientists identified the pollen in the honey and tracked it back to certain plants found around Chris's house in North Wales. It was this specific pollen mix that gave the honey its super properties, and therefore the researchers at Cardiff University came up with the idea of recreating Chris's back garden on a bigger scale back in Cardiff to see if they could mass produce this super antibacterial honey. And they started on the roof of the School of Pharmacy. They installed beehives on the roof and began planting the specific flowers identified in the super honey around the building. Their hope is to have beehives on lots of university buildings and to continue to plant the special plants across the university campus to create the first bee-friendly university in Wales. Through this effort, we will improve local biodiversity and provide food to the honeybees that already live in the city. But we don't want to stop there. The university is only a small part of Cardiff, and so we are keen to engage with our neighbours and share our bee-friendly ideas with the rest of the city. Visiting schools and teaching children and teachers about honeybees is part of spreading the word. I'm hoping that schools will also want to have a beehive on site to give them a better understanding of how amazing the honeybee is, but also to produce a super honey of their own. Who would have thought that Wales would be the place where we discovered the next superfood? Cardiff University wants your help to spread the word about honeybees. Create a bee-friendly city, and together we can improve the health of Wales and beyond.
All right. So now that we've learned a little bit about the project, let's go ahead and talk about bees. So honeybees are social and they make up a colony by working together. There's one queen in every hive with drones and many workers, and there are about 50,000 bees per hive, and that's about 2/3 the amount of people who can fit in Principality Stadium in Cardiff. So imagine that the next time you're watching the rugby game. So this is 50,000 bees versus 50,000 people to give you a bit more perspective. And this actually is not Principality Stadium. This is the Cleveland Browns Stadium, which is in Ohio, where I'm from. And that's about 50,000 people can fit in that stadium. So it should give you a good comparison of 50,000 bees and 50,000 people. That always blows my mind that 50,000 bees can fit inside a box. So the queen will lay between 175,000 and 200,000 eggs a year at a rate of 5 to 6 per minute. Eggs can become boys or girls. The queen larvae are fed royal jelly exclusively, and larvae in specialized queen cells are fed royal jelly, and that's what triggers the development of queen morphology. And if 2 queens hatch at once, they must fight to the death. Drones make up approximately 10% of the hive population, and they are the males in the hive. Their sole purpose is to mate with new queens, and they're essential to the survival of future honeybee colonies. Drones cannot sting you, and they die straight after mating, so it's a bit of a rough life to be a drone bee. Worker bees are all female, and they make up about 90% of the hive population. They do all the work and control most of what's going on inside the hive. At around 21 days, they leave the hive to collect pollen and nectar, and they can only sting you once, and they live only for about 6 weeks because they work so hard. So they work themselves to death, which is sad. So the Game of Thrones. If 2 queens hatch at once, they will fight to the death, as there can only be 1 queen per hive. Worker bees can stage a coup at any point by feeding royal jelly to larvae to produce a new queen. Bees will swarm when a hive becomes overcrowded, and when a new queen appears, the old queen takes about half the workers with her. The swarm will temporarily rest on the tree or the ground or a building. So if you do see a clump of bees together, that's probably a swarm that you're seeing. And if in the winter things get tough, the worker bees will remove all the drone bees from the hive to conserve resources and leave them for dead. So it is a hard life to be a bee. So here's a little bit about bees versus wasps, because a lot of people are very confused between the difference, and it is difficult to spot the difference. But bees are golden and black in color with tiny hairs all over their body, which make them appear fuzzy. When a bee stings a human, its stinger becomes embedded in the skin and then kills the bee because it no longer has a stinger. And bees live in hives made of wax or can be solitary and live in the soil, wood, or clay. So at the bottom here on the left is a honeybee, and in the middle is a bumblebee. And then on the right-hand side, we have a wasp. And wasps are bright yellow with black rings and a defined waist and a tapered abdomen. And they usually appear smooth and shiny compared to bees. Wasps can sting you more than once, and they make their nests out of pieces of wood, which they chew into a pulp and build their walls, which is similar to paper. So here's a bit about how nectar is converted into honey. So if anyone had honey on toast this morning, hopefully you'll still enjoy eating that after this slide. But nectar is extracted by the bee through the proboscis, which is its tongue, and it's stored in a specialized stomach, which is called a crop. So only nectar goes into this stomach. And in the crop, the nectar mixes and changes its chemical composition and pH. When it returns to the hive, it passes the nectar to another bee by regurgitating the liquid into the other bee's mouth. Regurgitation from bee to bee is repeated until the partially digested nectar is finally deposited into a honeycomb. To get excess water out of the honey, the bees fan the honeycomb with their wings to speed up evaporation. And then the bee will seal the comb with a secretion of liquid from its abdomen. And this liquid eventually hardens into beeswax. So they seal all of the honey with a layer of beeswax. And away from air and water, honey can be stored indefinitely, providing bees with a food source for the winter. So a fun fact is that they've actually found honey in King Tut's tomb in Egypt, which is over 3,000 years old. And it's technically still edible. I'm not sure that I would eat it, but it is still edible, which I think is pretty amazing. And honey can basically last forever because they can seal it off with beeswax and then also of the antimicrobial properties inside of it. So nectar contains compounds from the plant from which it comes from, which gives honey those antimicrobial properties. So different types of bee collects both nectar and pollen. The nectar is a carbohydrate for the bee, and the pollen acts as protein. So pollen has different shapes depending on the way which it's spread from plant to plant. So heavy sticky pollen must be carried from flower to flower by insects like bees. So on the left, we have dandelion pollen, and on the bottom right, we have chicory pollen. And they stick to the body of insects because they have little hooks on them that can stick to the bee's legs. And the bees are hairy and are electrostatically charged, so the pollen's actually attracted to the bee. And then some pollen grains are airborne and blown in the wind for long distances, and plants like grasses, corn, and many trees have pollen that blow in the wind. So the bees can still collect this pollen, but the plant does not rely on the bee in order for pollination to take place. And on the top right corner, we have a picture of bluebell pollen. And you can see that there's a crease in the middle, and that kind of creates an air pocket, which allows the pollen to be carried in the wind. So as you saw in the video, researchers at Cardiff University have analyzed different honey samples from across Wales to look for bacterial resistance. So we're looking for bacterial resistance because that's a really big issue right now in global health. Antibiotics are starting to become less and less effective as bacteria grows to become resistant to those antibiotics. So superbugs, as we call them, such as MRSA, are really nasty diseases that currently not all of them can be treated by antibiotics, so we're looking for new ones. And 500 honey samples from across Wales were tested. Honey was tested for its antimicrobial properties, which basically means we are looking to see if it fights against bacteria, viruses, and different fungi. And one sample of honey that we tested acted as an antibiotic, which is really exciting for our research. The pollens were identified from this special honey using DNA analysis, kind of like I said in the video. And the plants were identified from their pollen and further studied for their medicinal properties. So we use the honey as a tool to actually look at what plants have medicinal properties, because the bees can do all of this great work for us and collect all the pollen, and we can test the honey from there. And it's a lot easier than going around and testing all of the individual plants around Wales. So how did we identify the plants? We did this using DNA analysis, and you can see in the bottom right corner dandelion pollen. Again, that's one of our favorite plants on the Pharmabees team. And so there's lots of different plants that made up this super honey, but we're studying a few in particular, and dandelion is one of them. So we've actually found that dandelion has lots of antiviral properties, and they fight against viruses. So we're currently working on producing a lip balm that will fight against the virus that causes cold sores. But there are lots of other plants that we found in the honey as well that we are studying. So an example of the pollens that we're studying and the plants that we're studying are clover and dandelion. So on the right, that's dandelion pollen under a microscope, and on the left is clover pollen under a microscope. So you can see on the left, it's a lot smoother and rounder, whereas the dandelion pollen looks a bit fuzzy and spiky. So one of the outreach programs that we do is we go into primary schools and we talk to kids about the different types of pollen and the importance of biodiversity. As well as the importance of bacteria and good and bad bacteria, and also what antibiotics are. So we take microscopes into school, and actually they can look at different pollens underneath the microscope, which is really cool. So this is actually from one of those activities that I've done in primary schools. So honey has lots of medicinal properties, and there's different reasons for that the medicinal properties in honey. So honey has low pH and a really high sugar content, and honey also contains low amounts of hydrogen peroxide. And the antimicrobial activity of honey depends on where the bee feeds and which plants they visit. So different plants have different compounds that can cause honey to be antimicrobial. So as I've said before, dandelions can fight against viruses. And if you've ever heard of Manuka honey in stores, that has really high antimicrobial activity, and that actually comes from the Manuka plant. And methylglyoxal, which is in the picture here, actually is the compound from the Manuka plant that has that really high antimicrobial activity. And then bee defensin 1 is actually something that the bees put into the honey themselves. So each honey is different, and every year you're going to have slightly different honey with different properties. So you can't control where a bee feeds, so every year they're going to be getting different pollen and nectar from different plants, which will cause the honey to be slightly different every year. So around the Redwood building in Cardiff, we have planted different plants that we found have medicinal properties in hopes that the bees will visit, but every year we do get different test results just because the bee feeds on different plants every year. So now that we've talked a lot about honeybees, let's talk a bit about pollinators. So unfortunately, bees are in decline. So bees and other pollinators are under threat. The loss of natural habitat results in the loss of important food and nesting sites for pollinators. Present species extinction rates are 100 to 1,000 times higher than normal due to human impact. Insects will likely make up the bulk of future biodiversity loss, and 40% of invertebrate pollinator species, especially wild bees and butterflies, are facing extinction, but not honeybees. So honeybees are actually okay because people farm honeybees and use them for honey production, so they're doing okay. It's the other bees, like bumblebees white-tailed bumblebees and things like that that we're really worried about. So how do bees help humans? So the reason why we're really interested in bee decline is because bees actually help out humans a lot. Not only do they help us research new medicines, but they're responsible for about 1/3 of our food production. So this is an example of a grocery store. As you walk in today, this is what you would see. It's a really nice grocery store, and it's full of lots of different fruits and vegetables. So this is your choices currently as we have bees around the world. And this is your choices if we didn't have bees and the bees no longer exist. So as you can see, there's a lot less option, especially for fruits and vegetables. A lot of our fruits and vegetables rely on bees for pollination. So we'd really be in a situation where we wouldn't have enough food to feed everybody if we didn't have the bees. So that's where our Rewilding Cardiff project comes in. So we are developing a wildflower mix based on native plants that support pollinators such as bees and butterflies. And we're asking for your support to help us develop our research. So you can plant our wildflower seed mix at home and monitor the seeds as they grow. And basically these wildflowers will provide food and nesting sites for the pollinators. And by monitoring the seeds' growth and the pollinators that visit them, you can help us to further research plants and pollinators around South Wales, and the information that you provide will help support biodiversity and pollinator populations. So the following plants are represented in our seed mix. So we chose these seeds based on the fact that they're all native to the UK, as well as a lot of them have medicinal properties that we're studying as well. So some of those include common knapweed, corn marigold, oxeye daisy, white campion, dandelion, corn poppy, corn chamomile, cornflower, white clover, and bluebell. So here are some photos from our Rewilding Cardiff project so far. So we launched this project on Earth Day this year, and seeds are currently available at the Co-op on Coors Road in Cardiff and Blossom and Nectar in Canton. We're working on expanding our seed packets to other areas as well. So coming soon, hopefully to Splott and Grangetown. So you can pick up a packet of seeds when you're doing your food shop at a co-op or at near Blossom and Nectar. You can pick up these seeds, package 1 square meter of area. And so here's some pictures from our community members that submitted photos of our plants growing. So this is really exciting because these will provide food and nesting sites for pollinators. So we're hoping that people will plant them across Cardiff and hopefully provide more of an area for pollinators. So if you imagine a farmer's field with one crop, there's not a lot of options for bees to feed. So by having different food sites and nesting sites for the bees will help the pollinators spread and have more areas to live happily around Cardiff. So we've also developed some educational activities that go along with these seed packets. And so if you go to this website that I'm showing you here, we have lots of different activities that we've developed for different age groups. So one of the activities is you can test your soil at home in your backyard, and all you need is an old jam jar. And you can test what kind of soil that you have in your backyard. We also have a few different experiments around looking at the xylem and how plants soak up water. And then we also have, because we are the School of Pharmacy, we have some other activities around bacteria and how you can test for bacteria at home and the importance of washing your hands, especially right now. That's very relevant. So here are some photos of some bees that I've seen around my apartment in Cardiff. So on the left here, we have a white-tailed bumblebee, and it's on a Welsh poppy. And on the right, we have a tree bumblebee on wisteria. So one of the other projects that we're doing is the Spotted Bee project, and we're working with the University of Glasgow. And we have an app that we've developed where you can take a picture of a bee, like I showed you, and you can upload it to the app. And the app will use GPS location of where you took the photo. And you can help us by trying to identify the bee and the plant that it's on. And we'll be able to analyze all this data to see what pollinator species and what plants are across the UK. So it's really exciting. We've had over 3,000 spots on our app, which is really exciting. And a lot of them actually have not been from the UK. So we've had a few in the US and around Europe, which is really exciting. So a lot of people are using this app. And we're working on updates to make it a bit easier to identify bees. But even if you don't know anything about bees, you can still use the app. There is a button that just says unsure, but even just uploading the photo still helps us with our research. And the links are here for you to download the app if you're interested, but it's a really cool citizen science research project. And if you have any questions, or if you want any more information on our future projects, you should follow us on social media. That's where we do a lot of our announcements, especially on where the seed packets are and things like that. And that's all I have for right now. So I guess we can open it up to questions.
Thank you, Elizabeth. We've had a couple of questions come in already. So if anybody else has any questions they want to pose to Elizabeth while we have her, type them into the Q&A section now, and I'll grill her completely. Right, Elizabeth, we've had one question about visits. Do you allow visits to your bee project at the university, or do you guys go out to visit community projects in any way?
So we do, obviously right now we aren't doing any visits, but in the past we have done visits, and if you see the email on the screen, if you email, the only challenge with visits is that we can only have a maximum of 6 people at a time to see the hive. So that can be a bit challenging, but what we have done is, because it's so challenging, is we worked with the Trio Sci Company project to have a video, 360 video of inside the hive. So actually I probably should have shared that link earlier, but I can send that out. And so a lot of times for classrooms that we work with, we actually show that video instead, because we can't take all the students up to see the bees at one time. But we do also do visits into different community areas. So we have done things in St. David's and the Capitol Shopping Center. We have gone to schools around Cardiff and things like that. So we have done different visits, yeah.
What do you do with the honey that the bees produce? Do you sell that honey?
So in the past, the honey has been sold. However, we have been using more and more of it for our research. And we also produce different things with our honey now. So we're working on developing a tea. So it'll be a honey tea that we'll sell, as well as we're working on a honey gin. And we have currently that you can buy a honey beer called Mel. So if you see that around Cardiff, you can buy that. And actually some of the proceeds from that go to support our educational projects. And
where around Cardiff is that for sale? Is that just locally?
Yeah, so it's in Wally's and also in the Student Union. And I'm trying to think where else. There are a few other places. I think Aberdare Hall sells it as well.
Oh, fantastic. I may go there myself. Yeah. How many bees do we have at the university?
Sorry, can you say that again?
How many bees do we have at the university?
Ooh, so we have quite a few bees at the university. There's at least 5 buildings across campus that do have bees. So we're one of them at the Redwood building. And the Biosciences building, I believe, has one. The business school, and the Hayden Ellis also has one. And I can't remember the other one off the top of my head, but also the Welsh government building does have bees on the top of their roof. We don't manage those, but I can see them from the rooftop.
We've had a question from one of the beekeepers for the Cochrane, which is a building in Cardiff University. We're not sure about how far we go about harvesting the honey, what equipment is needed, and if there's a university resource where the equipment is shared.
So that's a really great question, and I wish that we did have the equipment, but basically you need a spinner to extract the honey. So we've been going to a local beekeeper and borrowing their equipment, which they've been really nice. But if you want to email me, I can give you the details to all of that. But basically we give them a small fee to extract our honey for us because we don't have the extraction equipment. It's really expensive and a lot of setup, so.
You mentioned you had 50,000 bees in one hive. So
yes.
Am I right in thinking you have only one hive? If so, have you experienced colony collapse or loss of a hive?
Ooh, that's a good question. So we do currently only have one hive. So at some point before my time here, I only started last spring, there were 2 hives, and I believe that one of them swarmed and was never replaced, but I'm not 100% sure on that. We have not had colony collapse disease, luckily. We were inspected last year by, I can't remember the name, but he's one of the local beekeeping inspectors, and we were clear for disease, which is good. So we haven't suffered from that yet, but it's definitely something that we're looking out for.
You mentioned swarmed. What does that mean?
So swarming. So bees swarm when the hive gets overcrowded. So there can be up to 80,000 bees in a hive. And usually when it reaches that point, and depending on how many supers and frames you have on the hive, so you'll put different boxes on the hive depending on the time of year. But if for some reason the hive gets overcrowded, and it usually happens in the spring, the bees will kind of split in half. So the old queen will take about half of the workers and they'll raise a new queen. And the new queen will then take over the remaining workers. And that the old bees will swarm and they'll look for a new home. So they'll usually, you'll see them, especially in kind of like May time around here. And you'll kind of see them hanging from trees or on different buildings or everything. And they're usually pretty docile. So the rules usually, if you leave them alone, they'll leave you alone and they'll leave within a few days. But they're basically searching for a new home. And the only downside to that, it is a natural process, but if you are trying to collect honey from the bees, it does reduce the honey production for that year because obviously you're reducing your workers in half. But otherwise, it's a completely natural, harmless process. It's just a bummer if you are raising your bees for honey production.
Do you think bee bombs work? I've just put a lot in my garden, so I'm hoping that lots of wildflowers pop up soon.
Ooh. Yeah, I mean, I think that planting any sort of native wildflowers is going to be helpful for the bees. Another really easy way you can help the bees is not mowing your lawn. So if you don't cut the grass, which I think is also a great excuse to just not do it, but that also really helps the bees because the bees like to nest in really long grassy areas and it gives them some protection. But yeah, planting native wildflowers will definitely help provide food sources. So we've been doing some research and found that actually a lot of bees are in Cardiff right now as opposed to outside of Cardiff, which you kind of think the opposite being a city. But because a lot of people have urban gardens, there's actually more feeding sites than in an agricultural setting around South Wales, which is kind of really interesting. So we're hoping to provide more food sites for the bees and then also do more across South Wales as well.
And how much does it cost to buy a beehive and the kit, and how much to maintain it, and how much honey will one hive produce annually?
Okay, that's a good question. So it is actually a bit expensive to start up beekeeping, unfortunately. So it'll probably be a few £100s, but you can buy a hive and that'll run you, I'm guessing, around £200. And then you'll want a suit. I have seen people on YouTube not wearing a suit. I'm not that brave, and I definitely recommend getting one to start out. So that'll be about another £100, and you'll probably need a smoker to start out with, and a few other pieces of equipment. But once you get going, it's actually not as expensive to maintain. You're going to have to buy new frames every once in a while because they will break, or if you have an issue and you need to sanitize them, you can get new ones. So each hive will produce about 14 kilograms of honey a year, and that really depends on how much pollen and things are around them. So if you live next to a community garden or something, you'll probably get a bit more. If you kind of live in an area where there's not as many food resources for the bees, it might be a bit less, but it's usually around 14 kilograms per hive per year. And on the years, like last year was a really bad pollen year for people with allergies, but it was a really great year for the bees. They loved it. So if you're suffering from hay fever, don't worry, the bees are probably loving it. At least something good is coming from it. But I would say, yeah, you get about 14 kilograms of honey per year, I would say.
Fab. We've got a question about the hot weather. Is that good for bees, bad for bees? What can we do to help the bees in this weather?
So if you want to help the bees in really hot weather, this is going to sound funny, but you can water the bees. So bees don't like to get wet, but what you can do is you can have a bucket or a bowl and put some gravel, some marbles, or even wine corks. And if you pour some water in and just basically have a site where the bees can land on something dry and then sip the water from, that actually really helps out the bees, because in the hot weather, the big worry is them cooling down. So they do have their own cooling system within the hive, and they'll kind of move their wings around to produce airflow throughout the hive, but they do definitely need water, and that's probably the biggest challenge in the hot weather.
You had a whole slide there on female bees and how much they do. What do the male bees do?
So basically nothing. The male bees really only mate with new queens, and that's really it. They only make up about 10% of the hive, and so that's also why in the winter, since they don't mate with queens in the winter, if they need to conserve resources, they'll kick them out. But yeah, basically drone bees don't do anything, and they rarely leave the hive except for to mate with a new queen. So they don't really do anything.
Excellent. We have lots of bees in our compost bin. I'm therefore cautious about using the compost. Would they be solitary bees, you think?
I would guess that they would probably be solitary bees. So there are a few different types of bees that live in kind of like soil or under the ground. So I would definitely be careful if you think you have bees in there, because if you mix your compost, you might disturb that, and you might have some angry bees. So I would just take caution with that. But yeah, I would think that they're probably solitary bees. And I would say if you want to remove them, probably the best bet would to contact your local beekeeping society. I don't know if they'd be able to remove it for you, but that would be your best bet if you wanted to move them to a safe place.
I think we've got one more question, unless anybody else has any last minute questions to add. Manuka honey you briefly mentioned, is it as good as the marketing says?
So that's a really great question, and it all kind of depends where you get it from and what grade it is. So they should all have a number on it. However, a lot of Manuka honey isn't actually as potent as it says, so you just have to be careful about where you get it from. And it is good in the sense of it does have really high antimicrobial activity, sorry. So it can be good. It is really expensive though, but there are some local honeys that also will do something similar. The challenging part is unless you test your honey in a lab, you can't prove how effective one is over the other. So I would say Manuka honey can be really good, but I mean, it depends. You'd really have to get it tested to know for sure. But if you buy it from a reputable store, it should be okay. I would say if you find a really good deal on it somewhere, it might not be the best. I don't know.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. Just to reiterate, if you want to sort of follow Pharmabees on any social media, I know they do a great sort of Instagram. There's also the Spot the Bee app you can download, which is free, I think, Elizabeth?
Yes, it's free.
Brilliant. And also, if you could try and find your wildflower mix from the 2 shops. Do you want to remind us which 2 shops they were?
Yes, so if you're in Cardiff, they're currently at Coors Road at Co-op, and Blossom and Nectar in Canton. And if you go to our website or follow us on Twitter, we have those all posted somewhere with the addresses and everything. Yeah, and we're hoping to expand that soon. I can't say a date yet, though.
Fab. I'd just like to thank everybody who joined us this morning for this session. I think it was really great and really interactive. I'm going to go water my bees this afternoon. Thank you to Elizabeth for a fantastic session. Have a good day, everyone. I'm not going to mow my lawn today.
Thank you.
Bye.